the 2-minute drill. All right, 2-minute drill time here. We're going to continue our coverage of the captain here on the podcast. Parts 3 and 4 of the documentary dropped last week. Joining me today to break it all down, one of my favorite baseball people, Alan Austin, is back with us. Alan, how are you?
Mike, it's so good to be back. Thank you for having me once again. It's always a privilege. I am well, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well. I have to admit, as not the biggest Derek Jeter fan, I have been watching from the baseball perspective, and these two episodes really hit, I think, the peaks of our baseball childhoods.
To be completely honest with you, I couldn't stand Jeter. I was anti-Yankee as a kid and as a young adult, and at this point, I can't help but say I obviously respect him and what he did for the game and the city. So I, too, have been glued to the screen during this documentary so far.
Yeah, I certainly agree. I think this is pretty good here. And I want to start off here. Let's start with part 3, because there's a lot to get through today. I think we should start with the addition of Roger Clemens to the Yankees here. I remember when they made the trade in 99, such a big deal. I thought they had some good, so I got to say Clemens also a good interview for this.
Clemens was good, but my wife said the way they're filming him, he looks like a private investigator. They have him in this super dark room. He's wearing this suit with a hat that no one knows what it is. He just looks like an old PI. I don't know. But yeah, it is good having him and having his perspective. But I'm going to jump the gun here. I don't buy for a second that he thought the bat was the ball. And also, why would you throw the ball?
Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, the ball makes no sense because obviously you'd be throwing it out of play.
None of what he said makes any sense, but he's sticking to it the same way he stuck to other stories throughout the years, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's certainly true. I did also appreciate that when I remember the story when I was a kid, it was how his first BP as a Yankee that Jeter and Knob walked over in full catcher's gear and he actually played the joke and threw behind them and not just didn't get in solo. That was good of him.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a Clemens guy either. I mean, shout out to his son who's on the Tigers now. For those who don't know, I'm a huge Tigers fan. But it's nice having him because when he did come to the Yankees, it was a huge deal. I remember it vividly. He was the Rocket. He was electric. He's one of the all-time best pitchers. And for the Yankee dynasty to acquire him, huge deal.
Yeah, for sure. And I thought another interesting thing that came out of the part 3, I think the 99 season we'll stick with right now, is the whole feud between Chad Curtis and Derek Jeter, because they had this whole brawl in Seattle where Jeter ends up talking to A-Rod during the brawl, and then Chad Curtis takes offense to it, talks to the media. Coincidentally, Chad Curtis got traded later on after the 99 season. So what do you think about that?
You know, it's funny. When Jeter laughed about how if I had that kind of pull, I would have had a long extension. But you and I both know if a star player of that caliber wants a player who's essentially a fourth outfielder off the team, yeah, I'm pretty sure he can make sure that a deal gets done, or at least would be like, I'm fine with it. You know what I mean? So I think Jeter's kind of underselling his importance there. But I also think, they could have easily gone the realm of Chad Curtis is a bad person in real life, and they didn't. They kept it to what happened on the field and didn't really go into Chad Curtis's real life demons, which I thought was a good touch because it seemed like they took the high road in that regard while still explaining the situation when it happened.
Yeah, because also in terms of Chad Curtis does have real life demons, they're also not relevant to the story we're telling.
Exactly. And I think they could have easily taken a cheap shot there to help paint him as a horrible person, but they kind of kept it to what was on the field, and I liked the way they went into it.
Yeah, and I'm sure this is something that you talk about with Jeter having, underselling his influence on, because obviously his whole thing is Jeter's agency is involved with it. This is basically the Jeter biography with his approval, all this. I'm sure there's some exit meeting in 1999 now. They said, hey, Derek, how do you feel about Chad Curry? He's like, not a fan. They said, we don't need it. We can move on.
Exactly. Like he probably didn't even need to say anything.
Yeah.
Let's look at it the way it was. And we almost, that situation reminded me of the Mets last year with Lindor and McNeil. And I know there were rumblings, and you would know this better than I, being how locked into the Mets you are, that people thought McNeil was going to get traded because of it.
Yeah, I remember that too. And then this seems to fix that this season. I mean, there seems to be a lot more camaraderie in that clubhouse than there was a year ago.
Which is great because I know, I root for the Mets. I'm not a Met fan per se, but I do like them. I would say they're probably my second favorite team. And I like both guys. So I'm glad that, cool prevailed, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go ahead to the beginning of the Yankee Red Sox portion of this. We go round one, Yankee Red Sox 99. We get the playoff series. Yankees steamroll them. I thought the best part of this section here was the whole, like, them started making fun of Nomar because Nomar just thought, oh, like, we didn't really like these guys. They're like, oh, we should have won. Like, we should have won with a better team. And Jeter immediately get called out. It's like, dude, that's what losers say. I thought that was a fun, like, way for them to take a little shot at Nomar in this.
I love that Jeter's not holding back. Yeah. He almost has that competitiveness still, even through interviews, thinking about his past. And Nomar is definitely part of it. Although it does seem like they generally like Nomar, A-Rod, and Jeter. I mean, Nomar was such a likable guy. And, if there's going to be a movie about him, I think Adrian Brody and him are spitting images of each other. So, but that's besides the point. I do like the Red Sox rivalry talk. They showed the brawl with Zimmer and Pedro, which I remember vividly. And I'm glad they went into that stuff because for us living in the New York metropolitan area, the Yankee Red Sox rivalry of that time period is part of our baseball history as fans. Like that is something we lived through. And you and I neither had a horse in the race, so to speak, but it was still captivating regardless. And I'm glad it's represented here.
Yeah, it's certainly a lot of fun. There's more on the Yankee Red Sox stuff later on here. When I go to the 2000s, specifically, they kind of go through the first couple of months, which, I mean, the Yankees had their ups and downs, but I thought it was interesting. I remember this because this is something I was very in tune with at the time. It's like in September of 2000, they were not good. I mean, they sort of faded down the stretch. They backed into the playoffs, basically. They clinched on a loss. The Orioles ended up beating them and they ended up winning the division. And it's just one of those things that you just sit there and you're like, boy, this is one of those things where it shows it's just so hard to win over and over and over again. And you wonder maybe that they were kind of just mailing it in, just waiting to get to October.
Yeah, that was cool. I had not remembered that as well as you had, but that's the thing about baseball. Just get to the playoffs, and then anything can happen. You can rejuvenate yourselves, but that run backing in, you could tell how much, just the fact that they didn't party with the champagne because they felt like losers that day who didn't deserve it. That showed you what that mindset of that club was. And it's a lot of these little stories and tidbits that really get you in the mindset of what it was like to be a winner during that dynasty.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we did get also some of the 2000 playoff run here as well. I thought the first A series, I thought the fun thing about that was sort of when Eric Chavez used to say at the time, it's like, oh, their dynasty is dead. We're going to beat them. And then Jeter and a couple of the other guys, they said, hey, this woke us up because they sort of tried to kick us while we were down. It got us a little fire going to get out of that series.
Absolutely. That was a great touch. And another guy I feel bad for, Eric Chavez, he's always been a good dude who everyone's liked. And then he's the one who looks in this documentary like a kind of an instigator. But I also don't mind what Chavez did because you want to have confidence going against the best. So it was just, it was kind of aw shucks for Chavez. But if that's what it took to wake the Yankees up, then you obviously never want to do something like that.
No, and they kind of brush over the Seattle series. The Subway series obviously is a big deal, and you're my age in the Subway series. Remember how crazy that was in this town when these two teams are juking it out here?
I do, and I was heavily rooting for the Mets in that series.
Yeah, well, you know who I was rooting for in that series, and that will go my way.
You were just rooting for a good matchup. I'm just kidding. I know who you're rooting for.
Yeah, I remember that series. I remember the story about George sending the furniture to Shea Stadium because he wasn't happy with the Met furniture here. And this is probably, in my opinion, I think Derek Jeter's best World Series in this World Series because, the Mets have the whole thing. We didn't need to rehash what happened in Game 1 apart from the Timo thing. We see them lose Game 3, then Jeter leading off Game 4 when he hits the home run does really change that entire series. So one of them goes all the way back to the Yankees on that one pitch.
Absolutely. Jeter was the star, before that, but that was his World Series, like you just said. And, it's fun watching that because for some reason, all this footage wasn't in high def and it all looks like it's from 1972. But it's what we watched live and had no problem with at the time. So that's fascinating to me. And the other fascinating thing is just Shea Stadium. Like, as fun and nostalgic as it is watching that stuff, once Citi Field gets some real playoff juice going and gets some real history, obviously we have the 2015 season, but once it gets a couple more years of, just monumental moments, it's such a more pristine and great place than Shea Stadium was. And I just cannot wait for you to have those Met moments in Citi Field.
Yeah, there might be some coming this year because that place can rock when the crowd really gets fired up.
I hope, I said this to my friend the other day in jest. I hope we're not watching a documentary 20 years from now called Judgment Day, and we see Aaron Judge talking about how when the Mets and Yankees faced off in the 22 Subway Series, no one was hotter than Edwin Diaz, and Judge took him deep.
Yeah.
Like, I just see ESPN painting the picture with the trumpets and Diaz and Judge talking about how he got the better of him. I hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I hope not either, because I think the other memorable thing about this series, obviously, is I thought it was funny how they mentioned the Benny Agbayani thing, or how he said the Mets are going in 5 games. Do you remember how that actually happened and where he actually made the prediction?
I do not.
He was actually on Regis and Kathy Lee when they interviewed him. He said Mets in 5 on that show.
That's funny.
Yeah, Regis was a big Yankee. I remember Regis' face. He was just like, what the hell?
That is so funny. Benny Agbayani was a classic 2000s Met player.
Yep. I remember.
The Benny and the Mets parody of Benny and the Jets, never not good.
Yeah, and I also was not a big fan when they were making fun of the Mets for having the Baja man on the field prior to Game 5 doing the Who Let the Dogs Out.
Yeah, well, that almost seems like it was also an MLB decision. Like, it was on the World Series broadcast. It's not like the Mets can just pull strings like that. I thought it was a little bit of a cheap shot myself.
Yeah, well, Jeter likes to take cheap shots at the Mets. I mean, he basically says, like, we were where it was just the Mets. It's just Steinbrenner came.
I cannot wait for that gif to come back this October. Hopefully the Mets do good stuff and people will just keep that receipt for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I did think they ended the episode pretty well here with more of the A-Rod Jeter stuff, because they had the infamous Esquire interview where A-Rod does the interview with the reporter. He basically says, Jeter's never had to lead. He can be the 2-hitter. He's on a team with a ton of talent. We don't have to worry about Jeter, worry about O'Neill and Bernie. Whereas, I have to do all this stuff. And I thought this was a good spot. And I did take offense a bit to the reporter, basically being asked, did you feel bad about breaking up a friendship with this thing? And he's like, hey, I have a job to do. It's not my fault they don't like each other.
I did not like that at all. I got to be honest with you. I thought that was a bad question for the reporter, because it tried to romanticize Jeter and A-Rod's friendship being destroyed by the media, when it seems like, they were cordial friends at best always. Like, it just seems like a weird, cheap knockdown of media and what media does when we're literally watching media. So it felt like a catch-22, and I really did not what do you want that reporter to say there? I just didn't appreciate that at all. I thought it was a weird question in general.
Yeah, I mean, this has been one of the running themes about the first 4 episodes. It's like, oh, the media made a big deal out of this. Oh, the media made a big deal out of that. And you can tell this is the Jeter piece, because Jeter is going to say, the media blew us up in a much bigger story than it actually was. And he's basically sending out his version of the story. So I give credit to the reporter, basically saying, hey, it's my job. I give credit to A-Rod. I said, hey, I said those things. He wouldn't be doing his job. He didn't report what he had.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I just did put a stamp on their relationship. I thought this was a okay episode. I thought they did some good stuff. I feel like of the 4, I think it's probably the weakest of the 4 that we've seen so far.
Part 4, I would agree with that.
I mean, I think part 3 was the weakest, I think.
Oh, part 3. I would say part 4 was the weakest. I also just think we need to start seeing, I feel like we've seen the same thing in a few episodes in a row now, which is the dynasty stuff. And I know they have a lot to cover. I know they've been glossing over some moments, but Jeter diving into the stands was like posters. Like, everybody talked about that for years. It's synonymous with Jeter's career, and they covered it in 5 minutes when I really thought, like, it's the flip they spent some time on, the dive. They could have done a whole segment just on his greatest plays, and I know they wouldn't have been done sequentially, but we watched The Last Dance, and that certainly wasn't sequential. So I think they could have pulled off some of his best on-the-field plays in a segment all its own.
Yeah, I think for sure. I do have some of my issues with this thing because I think, because you and I are not Yankee fans personally, I think in terms, like, this is definitely not going to be The Last Dance, because The Last Dance was sort of a big cultural, like, phenomenon, and it took a different time and place than it is now. I think this, in my opinion, I believe John DeSharncy said on his podcast, I think it's correct, this is basically Yankee fan porn.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. But you also want it to be good quality content that anybody can pick up and appreciate. And for the most part, I think they're achieving that. I just want to see a couple more of the. I know it's it's 8 parts, right? 7. And they have a lot of 7. They have a lot of ground to cover. But I just think there are some things, like, this is going back to the other episodes, but, like, for instance, they really milked the arbitration idea and how they were screwing over Jeter, when literally that's something baseball fans are, like, aware of every year. Like, will the star get paid? They'll come to terms on a settlement. Okay, they actually went to arbitration, which is a little more rare. But I feel like they milked that for dramatic purposes when it really wasn't that strange of a concept or big of a deal.
I don't think that's as big a deal to me, because I feel like they're foreshadowing some of the controversies he has with them later in his career, which I think I'm fine with that. I just think, like, obviously it's like we're kind of just like waiting in the dynasty stuff for so long, and I think, like, I feel like apart from the A-Rod stuff, there hasn't been a ton of, like, dramatic conflict, which is hard to get, because obviously they're for a period that win basically 3 World Series in a row, 4 in 5 years, and go to 4 in a row. So it's not like there's many, like, struggles for them to overcome here.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, okay, they lost to the Diamondbacks. Okay, that's one out of, a bunch of years, and 97 they lost. I just feel like we need to start learning. It's about Jeter, the captain of the Yankees, so we're learning about that. But, Michael Jordan had, again, I know it's not The Last Dance, but I think what we want to see as fans are a little bit more of the Jeter dating stuff, the Jeter celebrity aspect. And I don't know how much of that we're going to get, or how much he's willing to talk about it. So until we start seeing something different, okay, episodes 3 and 4 came by, we need to start seeing a little bit different content.
Yeah, that's something I give credit to The Last Dance for, because Michael Jordan was very open with, like, oh, I was gambling. Oh, this is why I quit for baseball. This is why this is going on
his father's death. Yeah.
Yeah, like, I feel like getting a much more polished version of this with Derek Jeter, where he has a narrative he wants to put out there, and, like, he's open to some degree. He's not as open as Jordan was.
Yeah, and I also don't, Michael Jordan's one of the most fascinating athletes to ever walk the face of the earth. Jeter was a really great player, a Hall of Famer, no doubt, who had really cool off-the-field stuff, but we were never really privy to it, just rumors, speculation. I think we as the fans watching this, especially the average Joe who wasn't a Yankee fan, they want to get more of Jeter. And to the first episode, which I thought was probably the strongest so far, learning about his home life in Michigan, coming up the son of an interracial marriage, that stuff was fascinating. Probably the strongest part of the series as a whole so far, in my opinion.
Oh, I totally agree with that. I mean, let's be real. Like, we're not gonna get, like, a segment talking about the infamous, like, post story about, like, Derek Jeter giving gift bags to, like, women he swept. Like, we're never to see this in this documentary.
Well, apparently they do talk about the gift bags, and he denies it. And I'm looking forward to seeing that, because, if he's denying it and it was true, that would throw off the validity of the documentary in general. But if he's denying it and it's not true, then it's like, so where did that rumor come from? Like, what's going on? So I'm interested to see what they do with it, and I hope it's coming up soon.
Yeah, well, let's get to part 4 right now. I mean, they had to start out in 2001. They do the fallout from 9/11, and I mean, we've seen this a million different places. I know, famously, the 9 Innings from Ground Zero covers a lot of this territory with this. There have been a bunch of documentaries about this. Did you think we got enough new stuff here in terms of the Yankee perspective on September 11th? What happened afterwards?
No, I thought it pretty much hit it spot on. I'm still a mess when it comes to 9/11 footage, which, every year that goes by, the footage seems grainier and older. But it's something that I know it's cliche, but I remember that day pretty well and the weeks to follow. And whether it was the Yankees coming back, the Mets wearing the FDNY caps, NYPD caps, Piazza home run against the Braves, or, Rudy Giuliani on SNL saying, "Why start now?" when Lauren said, "Can we be funny?" I remember that period very well. And I thought the documentary had some really good insight. Didn't really teach me anything new, but it was a nice time capsule situation.
Yeah, I thought the best part of that segment was sort of when we were going through individual players, talking about what was going on to things like Jorge Posada being in the hospital for his kid's surgery and talking about the hospital beds that never got filled, and Tino basically saying, "Oh, I got to get out of here." He leaves the apartment, ends up walking around for a while. Stuff like that I thought was the best stuff to come out of that area.
100%. I did not know about the Posada thing. The Tino thing was good perspective. I would agree with that.
Yeah, and obviously we know the story of the playoffs. Two things I want to start getting into here is, number one, I think they did a good job on the Derek Jeter flip play in the A series, because this is one, obviously, I think you would agree, probably the most famous play he's made in his career. And he does a good job breaking this down to I was the second cutoff man. And he said the most important part of the play was just getting the ball back to Posada. And to this day, I'll never understand why Jeremy Giambi did not slide on that play, because if he does, he's safe.
I thought they broke down that play really well and why Jeter needed to be there, even though he wasn't expected to be. I just thought, it really, really showed that on the field, his mind was always 10 steps ahead. I really appreciated that. And yeah, Giambi should have slid. I don't know what he was thinking. And it was just crazy. It was the craziest play. And as a Yankee fan, let's call it a hater at that age, that play drove me nuts. Of course he made that play. Of course the A's aren't going to get that run. I remember that vividly and being so mad.
Yeah, I remember as a kid, I was not a big fan of that, but watching it now, I'm like, that's just incredibly brilliant. It's just just having the force, go there, because usually there's the cutoff man and the second base is there. It's you are not anticipating there's going to be a third cutoff man and have Jeter be there to make that play.
Yeah, no, it was spectacular, and kudos to Derek. Again, all the Yankee hater stuff that Jeter, is talking down was me as a fan, as a kid, and as a young adult. I can't do anything but respect the guy now, and it was really just spectacular on-field awareness and execution.
Yeah, obviously, also talk about the 2001 World Series, which, if you've watched any of this stuff, whether it's 9/11, 90s and Ground Zero, all that stuff, a lot of that stuff is pretty much covered here again. But the one thing I thought was interesting we didn't get to it was in Game 7 here, when we have the whole, Mariano Rivera coming in, ends up blowing a save. I've never seen this before, the whole overhead shot on the fourth and third to Scott Brooks, where he doesn't throw the ball across the diamond with a double play. That I thought was new, and I was glad they put that in there.
Me too, because I honestly didn't remember that. That was something that I don't remember from the time. I might have been a little young. Well, you and I are about the same age, so we were only about 11 or 12, maybe.
About seventh grade.
Yeah, so I don't remember that vividly. So I'm glad they show that, because that could have changed everything, and I didn't remember that. So quite fascinating for sure.
Yeah, it was definitely a lot of fun. The one thing I feel like I was disappointed in this episode in was, and I would have loved to hear Jeter's take on this, because that World Series loss and leading up to it was everybody sort of knew going into that time, especially in New York, it's oh, this is the last run for this team, this dynasty team, because at that point, Paul Neer retires, Tino leaves a free agent, Brosius is gone. They really kind of gloss over. It's oh, everybody left, and here are all these new guys, and we don't even get Jeter.
Right.
You don't get Jeter's perspective on it. That bothered me.
Yeah, that bothered me too. He's the captain, and you're not talking about the players that left his team. They did gloss over that, and it's just okay, all right, I guess we're moving on.
Yeah, because for me, I'm that's something where you've been part of this core for basically since your rookie year. All these guys have been here, and then they're all the except Barney stays, Posada stays, but a lot of the big guys are leaving, and now here comes Giambi, here comes a bunch of these other guys, and you're not getting any reaction from Derek about, oh, what happened to these guys? And maybe I'm sure the question was asked. Maybe it wasn't an interesting answer. They put it on the cutting room floor, but I would have liked to have seen it.
I completely 100% agree with you.
Yeah, that was disappointing. And I will say one thing I did enjoy, and again, shout out to friends of the podcast, Rick Cerrone, for being in this part of the episode here. The backstory of the Jeter Steinbrenner Visa commercial here was fun because I did love that. I love that they went behind the scenes. They said that Steinbrenner's like, you know what, you have one take to get me doing the conga line with Jeter. And I thought it was fun where Jeter says, yeah, I was doing what I want. And I just told George, like, I'll put the work in. Don't worry about what I do off the field.
It was great. That was one of my favorite parts as well. I love the backstory there. And I remember those commercials. I know I sound like an old man by saying that, but I remember those commercials vividly. And to see the backstory of it, which obviously I wouldn't remember even if I'd read it. I was not in tune with like the papers or the you know, if Twitter was a thing back in Jeter's day, I'm sure everyone at all times would know what was going on with Jeter and Steinbrenner. But I didn't back then. So to hear that now, great insight.
Yeah, it was also fun that like we get basically him telling a story about how like one night you have to decide to go bring all the guys out in the town, like brings Matsui out, Giambi out, all the guys, and the paper happens to see them there and basically a headline, "Oh, Derek's partying again," and that's when Steinbrenner decides making the captain. I thought that was also great timing.
Yeah, so funny, and you know Steinbrenner himself could probably have a documentary. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think ESPN did one back in the day in the original 30 for 30 run on George.
Oh, interesting. I'd have to go back and look at that.
Yeah, I'm sure it's in the back. I remember watching it a while ago. I think it was like 2008-ish maybe it came out. It was like right around when he died. I think is when they had it done.
Yeah, I have to go back. Yeah, I would definitely check that out now, knowing it exists.
Yeah. Now let's go ahead to round 2 of Yankees Red Sox here, the 2003 season. We get a lot of this playoff series stuff. I think most of it we sort of get. We get more dunking on Nomar again, talking about how like Nomar basically says, you know, like we had no problem with these guys. Then a couple of the Yankees basically oh, we hated them, and like I thought again, this did a pretty good job reminding everybody that like back in this era, it was sort of the 2003 to 2006 era here, that like when Yankee Red Sox games happened, like all of baseball sort of stopped and looked and see what was happening.
Yeah, and this is the series with Boone, right? That was in this episode.
Yeah, this
just another instance of us as young non-Yankee fans being so furious that, of course, Aaron Boone hit it off Tim Wakefield. Like, just like one of those moments that was so aggravating. And now, you know, Boone, of course, is in, you know, the manager's chair for the Yankees. It's funny how things come full circle, but to be honest with you, Aaron Boone's run as a Yankee is pretty much limited to that home run. And correct me if you think I'm wrong, but what a moment to have as your big Yankee moment to eventually be welcomed back as manager because of it.
Yeah, because I remember that because he has the home run. They're expecting to play third base following year. They tears up his knee to pick up basketball game. That's when that leads to A-Rod.
Right. So Boone's greatest contribution, besides the home run, was blowing his knee out playing basketball, thus leading to the arrival of Alex Rodriguez. And I thought it was very interesting how they dove into the Boston aspect of it. Like just another way the Yankees beat the Red Sox, which makes, you know, what's coming in 2004 even that much cooler. But like that moment of Red Sox were about to pull the trigger, blah, blah, blah. And of course the Yankees swoop in after Boone gets hurt. Now, to the Red Sox credit, they tried their butts off to make that deal happen. Money was an issue, and it just didn't work out.
Yeah, we'll get back to A-Rod in a minute, though. I want to point out one thing, though. I feel like in the Yankee run here, that 2003 World Series appearance often gets forgotten because they lost it after the big boom moment. Everybody sort of forgets about that one, but I thought it's another one they kind of glossed over, sort of like what happened here with the loss. Because, I mean, they get a little bit of Jeter going, oh, you know, like, you could like sort of deny it. They weren't ready for that one, but like I thought it would be an interesting explanation, sort of wondering like what happened. Like, was the emotion of that Red Sox series so high that like they took the Marlins for granted? And the Marlins, remember at the time, were going, oh, you know, we had a great year, like blah blah blah, we're happy to be here, and they ended up winning the whole thing.
Yeah, I found that to be like a little bit of what Jeter said about the Red Sox saying blah blah blah. That's what losers say, and then here they are saying we weren't prepared or whatever. And I was like, well, wouldn't that be what losers say too? So, like, it was a little bit of to me, it was a little contradictory, but I'm sure not everyone took it that way. But that was a good World Series. Like, that World Series had moments, and they definitely because they wanted the story to be the Red Sox, they kind of just pressed fast forward over the fact that the Yankees did not win everything after beating Boston. So it really was a head scratcher that they just kind of went, oh, yep, and then they wound up losing. Anyway.
Yeah, I feel like that's like one where they can kind of just sweep it under the rug, because obviously they're going to have to talk about, like in episode 5, you can talk about the Red Sox collapse in 2004 when they basically blow the 3-0 lead. You can't ignore that one. This is kind of like, we don't need this one. This is not as important to the story.
Agreed.
Yeah. And let's go back to A-Rod. You brought up the sort of the circumstance of it where they're trying to compete for you to have this deal in place. They could trade Manny to Texas for A-Rod. The money doesn't work. A-Rod has to give money up to go to Boston. He even says, I thought this is fascinating. He just says, like, in the long run, I may be better off I went to Boston, because then we don't have all this other like drama going on here. You know, he does win a ring with New York eventually.
Yeah. It would have been interesting to see him as a Red Sox. I guess Garcia Parra would have been in Chicago by then, or would he have moved over? I would be interested. No, I don't remember the timeline of Garcia Parra. But if you're going to set up Garcia Parra as being one of these big shortstops, I think they should have spoken about what it would have meant for him if A-Rod went to Boston. And I know it's not that important to the Jeter aspect of it, but it would have concluded a narrative, so to speak.
Yeah, it definitely would have. And I do think they did a good job sort of like diving in some of the awkwardness of this, because especially like when Jeter basically says, you know, like, I was asked to be at the A-Rod press conference, and you could tell from the body language back then he had no desire to be there. And that sort of leads to the whole conversation that they had. And this is probably the highlight of the night in terms of stuff we didn't know, was that we had this rain delay in Chicago where Jeter and A-Rod, the last two guys in the dugout, and A-Rod, Jeter, this conversation where A-Rod's like, are we good? Jeter's like, I kinda. And then they start getting this debate about, like, are you okay, like, not being the shortstop? A-Rod's like, look, if I wouldn't want to be the shortstop, we'd go back to Texas. So I thought that was a very fascinating conversation to have revealed in there.
I thought that was the best part of that episode as well. And there was something there that really, you know, we could break down psychology and everything. Jeter talks about how he was talking to his dad and came up with that conclusion of what's your ulterior motive. And when you think about the way they talk about Jeter's father, he's a very competitive, hard-nosed, no-nonsense guy. And it just shows you that Jeter, his relationship with his dad is very much one of mentor-mentee. He loves his father, and that's just another instance of things he does with his dad playing out in real life, conversations they've had, mentality shaped. And I found that fascinating as someone who associates baseball with father-son, and it's just this all-encompassing world for me, you know, personally. And I found that very fascinating that was part of that scene, because it was indeed a great scene.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a lot of fun. I mean, A-Rod's certainly been, like, showed off some of the insecurities throughout the documentary, but I do feel he's owned up to, like, his role in, like, all of these stories. I feel like it's A-Rod's record is very valuable to this thing.
A-Rod's great. A-Rod, you know, at one point, A-Rod said something like, it was when they were talking about some story in the paper, and A-Rod said, that's not how it happened. I think it was talking about the stats versus winning. And he was trying to, like, brush it off as cool heads. And then Jeter was like, I don't care who's better, I win. And it was definitely their two types of personalities. A-Rod's in a place in his career where he's kind of still making amends, kind of still self-deprecating on broadcast, still trying to make in with, you know, be nice to people so he's accepted in the baseball world. Whereas Jeter doesn't have to do any of that. So he can be ruthless, cold, and calculated, and people will respect it because he never did anything, quote unquote, wrong to the game and the fans. So it's an interesting dynamic in that regard as well.
Yeah, I think we end the episode in an interesting place, too. Basically, we end with the Jeter dive into the stands against the Red Sox during the regular season. We sort of have the lingering shot of Nomar basically being detached from his teammates in that game, which he foreshadows him being traded a couple of weeks later. So I thought it was an interesting spot to leave off here, and because you know next week we have 2 more episodes coming here, but we're going to hit this 2004 Red Sox collapse next week hard. So where else do you think we're going next week? How far do you think we go into the timeline?
I think that Red Sox series will probably take up most of part 5, if not all. It was such a huge deal. I think that's probably going to be that. And then I think part 6, you got to start getting into the personal life stuff, or else the fans are just going to, like, what is it going to be, 1 episode and 7 to the concluded slate? Like, no. I think part 5 heavily features the Red Sox series and maybe the rest of his playing days. And then part 6 will get into the personal stuff, which everybody's waiting for. That's just my guess.
I think my guess is we're going to end next week with him winning in '09. That would be where my guess is where we stop.
Right. Well, that would go along with maybe we use part 5 to kind of finish off his playing, and then part 7 could be the grand conclusion.
Yeah, because
getting a family and blah blah blah.
Because interesting, because like the framing device throughout this has sort of been his last game at Yankee Stadium. I mean, we've cut to that like at the beginning of every single episode here. So I wonder, are we stopping there, or are we going to talk about him wanting to get into ownership and stuff like that? That I'm curious about.
I think you got to get into it because it's 2022. That was 8 years ago. And he's done so much since then. If they don't talk about it, it'll be like, okay, we get it. It was during his playing days, but you always want to do the where are they now? So I'm hoping they do touch on it.
Well, I mean, they didn't really, and go back to the last days, didn't really touch on Jordan going to the Wizards, for example. They sort of like just swept that under the rug. And they say, oh, like this is basically the end of the story. It's like the '98 season when he hits the last shot against the Bulls, against the Jazz.
That's true. Maybe they won't. I just hope they do it a little bit.
Absolutely.
Especially now, we want to know, I know this was filmed and recorded over the last couple of years. I want to know what his mindset, what his future in baseball might look like, and I hope they kind of dig into it a little bit.
Yeah, I hope they do too. But Alan, thanks for all the time. I really appreciate it. Before I let you go, I could do a follow on social media. Keep on some of the stuff you're up to.
Sure. So on Twitter, it's at Allen, ALLEN _Austin _. And that's probably the best place to find me right now. So give me a follow if you're listening. And one more thing about the documentary, really nice to have Gerald Williams represented. And like I said, they filmed this over the last couple of years. He sadly passed away earlier this year, but getting to see him on screen, being able to talk about Jeter is a really nice thing to see. And I'm glad it was able to be accomplished.
Absolutely, Alan. Thanks for all the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.